This episode of the Data Career Podcast, I talked to one of my former students, Courtney Ballard, and we talked through her data journey of where she went from high school math teacher to lead data analytics consultant for Wells Fargo. We'll talk through what a teacher needs to do to break into the data analytics field, what you need to do to break into the data analytics field, and talk over some general strategies to do this whole process. This is the Data Career Podcast, episode 53.
Welcome to the Data Career Podcast, the podcast that helps aspiring data professionals land their next data job. Here's your host, Avery Smith.
Welcome back to another episode of the Data Career Podcast. This is episode 53, which I'm really excited about. We have an amazing guest today. We have Courtney Ballard, who is an alum of the Data Analytics Accelerator program. So she was part of my bootcamp and now is on the other side to tell her story. She is no longer a teacher. That's what she used to be. She is a lead data analytics consultant at Wells Fargo, like the really big bank. And she's a former high school math teacher. She's a master teacher fellow, national board certified teacher, and innovation grant recipient of the North Carolina State University for STEM educators, which is obviously she's a very good teacher, basically, as I'm trying to say, or she used to be. I'm sure she still teaches informally, but now she is, like I said, a lead data analytics consultant at Wells Fargo. She's an alum of the Data Career Jumpstart Bootcamp program that I run called the Data Analytics Accelerator. And she's an amazing person and a great guest. So Courtney, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So if you guys don't know Courtney, definitely want to go follow her on LinkedIn. She has some good stuff that she's sharing. But with that intro, Courtney, you were obviously a really good math teacher. You know, you're getting a master's degree, you won awards. What made you want to leave teaching and go into data analytics?
Honestly, it was really tough. That's a really great question because I loved my students. I loved my colleagues. I love my administration. And I know that's not every teacher's experience. And so I've been teaching for 10 years, and I'm the type of person who always wants to continue to grow and to learn. And I've been through a county cohort for leadership in my county. And like you said, I received my master's degree in 2020, so fairly recent, and I didn't receive any incentives for that. And I also received my national board certification 9 days before I started this new job. So a lot of my things were very recent accomplishments, but ultimately I had reached the ceiling in my profession, and there was nowhere else that I could go if I wanted to stay in the classroom. And I really wanted to continue to grow, to provide for my family, to have flexibility. And so I decided to seek options outside of education. I have a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old at home. And so having young children, flexibility was really important to me. And coming home and having the energy for them was really important to me. I often found myself really overstimulated at school. I working with them, but whenever I came home, I was exhausted and I didn't have the energy that I wanted to be able to give to my family.
Okay. So basically leaving the classroom is hard. You loved your
Yeah.
students, but for you, the key was, I want to keep growing. I want to keep, earning more. I want to keep rising up. And you kind of hit that ceiling in the classroom. So you're like, all right, I need something else, but also I want to do something a little bit different for my family and for myself, something a little bit maybe less stressful, something that allowed you to have more energy, right? Okay. But what made you choose data analytics then? Because there's obviously lots of things you could have done. What drew you into data analytics?
Yeah, so teachers use data in the classroom every day, whether it's through your homework assignments, so you're analyzing that data. A lot of us use digital forms of checking homework and things like that. So I was using data to drive my instruction every single day. And then I noticed something about myself that was different from all of my colleagues. Like whenever the data came back from any assessment, I was always like, what is the data? What is the data? And I wanted to see how my students grew, who were underperforming, and I wanted to help them meet and exceed those expectations. And so I used data to drive that, becoming interested in data analytics and studying more about it at that time.
Yeah, I think something that you said is really important is that teachers actually make great data analysts. They just don't know it yet. They've been using data in the classroom. They've been trying to learn and grow with the data, trying to become better teachers with the data. And they're also fast learners and great presenters and great teachers. And, those are some of the qualities that you need to have as a data analyst. So a lot of the time teachers make great data analysts. They just don't know it yet, which I think is true of you. Maybe you did know it, but I think teachers can make great data analysts at the end of the day. Okay. So you were like, all right, I'm kind of a numbers nerd. I'm looking at, these teachers' reports. Some of the teachers don't even look at the reports, but I'm looking at them. I'm interested in these numbers, what they have to say. And you're like, all right, I want to start doing this. Maybe I want to get out of the classroom. What steps do you take and what advice do you give to someone who's maybe in a similar place? A teacher who's listening right now, who's like, I really want to get into data analytics, but I'm just starting out.
Yeah. So I'm going to give the advice first. So I would advise everyone who is choosing data analytics to consider your own journey. My journey is only one story, and there are a variety of avenues that this could take. And so I want you to remember to stay open to that journey also changing. My journey changed in directions that I didn't anticipate. So I would just encourage you to stay open and remember that your story will be different than my story and different than the next person's story. So, first, I started researching and considering my passions, my commitments, and my desired timeline. I knew that I was passionate about mathematics. I knew that I was passionate about teaching, even, and I knew that I was passionate um, about data. And so I also had some commitments that I had to consider because I was in a 5-year contract and I still had 2 years or a year and a half left in that contract. And so my desired timeline was okay, I'm going to take this kind of slowly. I'm going to do it in a year and a half. And one of my strengths from Strength Finders is one of my top ones is that I'm a learner. I'm a researcher. So I research schools, I research boot camps and many different programs. And initially, I was going to go to UNC Charlotte. I learned that they had like a boot camp that was only 6 months or 8 months. I can't remember. And it was like $12,000. And I was like, $12,000 for 6 months? What? So, so I was like, okay. And then I just, thought about it some more, but didn't really take any action. And then I was at the park one day and learned about Georgia Tech and that they had a master's degree program and that I could get a master's degree in under $10,000. And I attended an online information session. I got super excited. I was like, all right, this is the journey for me. I'm going to apply. I applied, I got in and thought that was going to be my key to my next path. And I knew that I had the time. I had the 1.5 to 2 years. I wanted to finish a master's and then do my data analytics transition. And then I stumbled across a video from Avery Smith. You don't know, I don't think you know it's part of the journey,
I
but
don't.
actually the way that I found you was from your video, and I actually looked it up today. It's called My Review of Georgia Tech MS Analytics. And so that's how I found you. And based on what you said, you were saying, I mean, everyone's path is different, right? And for you, the reason why you took it or you did that program, it was very, very beneficial for you. But for me, who was just wanting to break into data analytics, it might not be necessary. And I was like, all right, well, based on what this guy says, I don't need to do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. And so I did. But I also began following you on LinkedIn at that time. And I think I had 20 connections. This was in June. This was in June of last year, so just 2022. And so at that time, you were doing 30 days to data projects. You remember that? I'm
Yep.
sure really busy time in your life. And so towards the end of that, you started sharing about the 21 days to data. And I knew that based on the timeline, I was like, okay, that will end right before Georgia Tech starts. And I'll know whether this is really something that I enjoy. And so I started that. Honestly, I loved it. I loved everything I was learning. I loved that it was quick, 30 minutes a day. And you brought me out of my comfort zone to actually start posting on LinkedIn. And I had never posted before. I had LinkedIn since like 2018. Never done one post. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. So I started learning and actually I'd taken a couple of courses prior to your course, but it was just like skill building courses and this was more action oriented with building my network and stuff. And the 21 days of data ended and then Georgia Tech started that same week. And when I started Georgia Tech, I remember I was so excited. And we went to Atlanta. We got the sweatshirt. We got the pictures. Yes, it
Oh, I
went
didn't know
all
that.
in. Yes, I was like, I'm doing this. I'm so excited. My husband was my cheerleader. He was so excited too. And That first week, it was okay, but I spent every night I was working past midnight. The whole weekend I worked on my coursework because I was also teaching at the same time. So I was teaching, coming home, feeding the kids, putting them to bed, and working the rest of the night. And then I was like, oh my man, this is going to be 2 more years of my life. I just did this in 2020. I just got my master's degree, and oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do this again. And so I decided that after 2 weeks of doing that, I was like, "That I don't want this life. I do want the life after. I do want a job in data analytics, but I don't want this life, for the next 2 years while my kids are really young. And maybe I'll go back, but not right now." And so I went to my husband, I was like, "I can't do this anymore. I wanna do something different." And I said, "If I stop tonight, will you let me enroll in the in Avery's boot camp?" And he was like, "Of course, like, I support whatever you wanna do, like, this is." I actually got most of the money back, it was only 12% in, okay? But my experience there were 800 people in the class, okay? This is another thing, and there were 20 TAs, and if I had a question, I was expected to post it on the discussion forum and read through responses from 800 people or 20 TAs and try to find my answer. And I was like, "This is so overwhelming." So it just wasn't the path for me. And when I joined your course, very shortly after that, I met with you and we created a roadmap. And I was looking at that roadmap actually, and you asked me some of these same questions, and you were like, "Why are you learning data?" And I said, "Love data." And another thing was that I wanted to have less side job and build a bigger margin. As a teacher, I don't know many teachers that just have one job. And I tutor because I want to now, actually. I tutor because I want to, but not because I have to. And while I was teaching, I had to tutor to support my family. And so that was part of it too. I wanted to be able to give that time back, to gain that time back with my family. And so my personal roadmap, part of that was to post my 21 Days to Data project because I still had not posted it, even though I had finished it. And I have what is called perfection paralysis. And I would not post because I didn't think it was perfect and nothing is, right? But you were like, okay, Courtney, first thing, you've got to post your project. You already have it written, you've got to post it. So I posted it and then I set up my portfolio. I did the teacher section of your course and I even from that created my own teacher project. And you can see that on my LinkedIn.
Yeah, with like your own state's data, right? With your own
Yeah,
state data.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, with
Okay.
my own state data. And
That's
then
awesome.
yeah, and updated my LinkedIn, tuned it up, um, and and yeah, did a couple more projects. So I I don't know, I think I covered everything there, but there's
Yeah.
a lot more into the process, updating my resume, my cover letter, and making sure that my resume had specific things. This is something that I kind of wanted to touch on was translating your resume to business terms. And I think it's important to talk about how teachers are relationship managers, how teachers are change managers, how teachers are risk managers. In data, even, we are relationship builders. We have to go from the data to the partners and present this data in a way that makes it understandable to them. So we have to be able to build relationships with those partners so that they trust us, so that they trust that the data that's coming from us. And we do that as teachers. We're constantly building relationships and managing relationships with our students, with our parents, with our teachers, with our colleagues, with administration, even with other schools within the district. Change management. So technologies are constantly changing. And so processes are constantly changing in the school system. And so I think that it's important that teachers highlight that on their resumes. And then also risk management is a big one. That's a lot of the data industry is managing risk. And teachers need to show how valuable you are in that space. We as teachers are responsible for identifying and mitigating safety risks all the time. Creating a safe learning environment, which includes proper storage of materials. It's very important in the data world that you properly store the data, that you don't let it get out, and that you have correct use of equipment and that you follow safety procedures. You have to follow procedures in the data world as well. And also managing academic risk. There's creating individualized education plans for struggling students and managing behavioral risk by developing rules and consequences and addressing issues. And so all of these things teachers do, and you can highlight those things on your resume in the terms that the business needs to understand them.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I think what you basically said was, teachers can make great data analysts at the end of the day, and they have a lot of the skills necessary. I also liked on your journey how you tested out to see if data analytics was for you. I think that's an important step. And do you have that roadmap still?
I I do. I have it pulled up on my computer right now.
What was the timeline we put on that roadmap?
Yeah, so the timeline was for apply for a data analyst job in November, but I jumped the gun. I
Okay.
start so I applied in October. I got to November. I started my journey with 21 days of data in September, and then started your course in like late September, I think. And then I started applying in October. At first, I was applying to just anything and everything. There's Easy Apply on LinkedIn. There's all these different websites where you can apply to things, and I was just applying everywhere, and it wasn't really focused. And at that time, I decided, okay, what do I really want to do? I've always been interested in banking and finance, and so why am I applying to all these other things? So then I narrowed my focus, and Charlotte is a banking, banking is a big industry here, and so I narrowed it down to the two biggest banks in Charlotte. I was like, all right, well, there's a lot of jobs there. There's a lot of data jobs there. So I started applying to all the data jobs at these two banks. And surprisingly, or I was surprised, I guess, that I started getting interviews faster than I would have originally anticipated. And I got offered my first job in November, and I started my role now in December 19th.
If you join 21 Days Data in September, that's about ends up being around a month long program at the end of the day. So
Okay.
that means you start in September, you join the big boot camp in October, and then you do the big boot camp October, and then you have a job offer in November, right?
Right.
Okay. So we're talking September, October, 2.5 months from I'm not sure where to go in this journey to your first job offer, which the first job offer was a pretty good offer, if I remember right.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a really good offer.
And how close were you?
Oh, I had been offered the job. Like, I had talked with the manager, I talked with the recruiter. They were like, yeah, we want you. You're the one for this job. And this was November, end of the year, quarter four, and the business froze all hiring. And but I didn't know this until I kept reaching out. Hey, what's going on? What's going on? And I think they were working behind the scenes trying to work it out, but cricket, I wasn't hearing anything. But in the meantime, I had other interviews. I didn't stop interviewing, and I think that's a really important part of the process. I hear a lot of people, they get an interview, they get that job offer, and then they stop. They stop everything. But until I had signed the offer, I kept applying, I kept interviewing, and I actually had another interview the following day after I was offered the job. I still took that interview, still interviewed, and then I didn't have my next interview until 2 weeks later, and I was like, "Okay, I'll keep it on the books. I'm not gonna reach out to them and tell them that I'm not gonna do it." And that was my Wells Fargo job. So I'm glad that I didn't.
Yes, I just wanna emphasize that and more because I think you undersold that, you guys. Courtney literally had a job offer in her inbox, like, literally, you might have even signed it, I don't even know, like, you were like it was, like, on a Friday, I remember you told me, "Hey, I got the job, I'm gonna, like, sign it and send it in Monday." And then, like, Monday came around, and it was like, "Oh, the whole company's on a hiring freeze, sorry, like, we're gonna have to not offer you that job." Like, you had that job, right?
Yeah, I had the job. I didn't ever actually get the paperwork, and that's what I kept reaching out about. "Hey, do you have the paperwork?" And then they kept telling like, they would say, "Yeah, it's coming," but then I wouldn't get it. So I just kept, and eventually they told me, "I'm so sorry. We really wanted you, and we were trying to work it out with the business, but ultimately, like, they froze hiring and wouldn't approve it." So
I just want everyone listening to put yourself in Courtney's situation where you spent all this time learning, you spent all this time interviewing, and keep in mind, she's a teacher. So, like, doing interviews is really hard. You're like doing them on lunch breaks, or you have to take like a half day off of school and get a sub, to do some of these interviews sometimes. And she literally like got the email and was like, "Hey, you got the job." And then to have that, taken away from her, it would have been devastating. And I would have been tempted to give up. I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I am done." Like I was so close, but she didn't. Okay. She didn't like say to Wells Fargo, who was interviewing her in 2 weeks, "Hey, like I already got a job." Like she kept going. Right. And this is one of the things I remember talking to you about this, where it was like devastating. Like you literally had a job. And, as your coach, as your cheerleader, I was like stoked for you. And then to have that ripped away, I felt sad. And I think one of the things I said was like, well, I believe everything happens for a reason. And, when God shuts a window, he opens a door, or vice versa. And so 2 weeks later, you interview with Wells Fargo and the interview goes pretty well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It went really well.
And you get a job offer. Oh, they had you do a case study? Is that what they had you do?
Yeah. Yeah. And so with that job, the process was I first met with a recruiter. And then after meeting with the recruiter, whether or not it went well, she sent me a project, take home project. And so it went well. So I got the take home project. I had 48 hours to complete the take home project. And I, being who I am, I finished it. Like I worked like all that night and sent it in at 9 a.m. the next morning. And so by like noon that day, they were reaching out wanting to interview me. And I think I interviewed on Tuesday of the next week or something, and then by Friday of the next week. So it was about a 2-week process in my interview to finding out. And honestly, that's still kind of fast for the corporate world from what I've learned.
It is. It is. And they offered you the job. And was it a better or a worse job than the first offer?
Better.
Like a lot better, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I don't
Yeah.
know, you never know, but yeah, I definitely think so. I think it honestly, it couldn't have worked out any better. There is on my team someone who has transitioned from teaching into analytics, and so she's been able
Ah.
to support me through that process, and it's really cool how everything works out for a reason. So,
Yeah.
yep.
And now with your new job, you have the chance because going back to one of the reasons why you wanted to get into data analytics, you were like, "Oh, I have this 4-year-old and this 1.5-year-old I want to spend more time with." Fast forward to today, are you able to work remotely at all?
Yes. So I work remotely and I have to work 1 day in office a month. So yes, I work remotely. A lot of people ask me, so do you keep your kids at home? No, I do not. I do get to spend a lot more time with my kids. I get to go pick them up whenever I need to and come back home and finish working. And the days that they're sick, I can keep them home and continue working. And it doesn't inconvenience my coworkers. It's always, there's so much with teaching, like you feel so bad when you have to take off a day to care for your family. And that just shouldn't be the case, but it just is. It's the reality of the work, and other people have to cover for you, and it can be inconvenient. So, in this stage of life, it's been so nice having that flexibility.
Life's better as a lead data analytics consultant than a teacher, I guess. Is that what you'd say?
Yeah, there are definitely perks for sure.
Yeah, it's true. It's
I
true.
go to the bathroom whenever I need to. I can eat lunch and or take a longer lunch or a shorter lunch some days. So it's a lot more flexible.
Yeah, I think one of the best things about being a data analyst compared to a teacher is you don't have to get a sub, If you go
Yeah.
on vacation, it's not like you have to find a sub, train your sub. Like our roles are pretty low stress in the majority of data analytics roles where it's like if you're gone a week, if you're gone for 4 hours, it's not a big deal. But in teaching, like imagine if you just like didn't get a sub for a whole week, like that would be a big problem. So it's just, yeah, I see a lot of ways where it's a little bit less stressful. Okay. Well, that is amazing. Like, absolutely so happy for you and your family that you guys, have less of a commute, get to spend a little bit more time together, get to earn more, and enjoy what you're doing a little bit more. I think that's great. Do you think it's possible for teachers to become data analysts?
I would advocate that teachers are data analysts.
Mm.
Teachers are data analysts. Teachers are constantly monitoring student progress. They are analyzing test scores, grades, classroom assessments, and they use area data to identify areas where students are excelling and areas where they need additional support. Teachers are using data and curriculum planning to analyze their data, to inform their curriculum planning, and to adjust their teaching strategies. Teachers are using data for program evaluation. They're tracking student progress over time. They're seeing if their students are meeting benchmarks, if they're exceeding benchmarks, and making adjustments to improve effectiveness. And ultimately, as a data analyst, that's what you're doing. You are trying to improve effectiveness within your companies, and you're trying to make recommendations based on that data. And um, so teachers are data analysts,
I
whether
love
you
it.
think it or not.
That's awesome. I love it. Hey, I'm a big Teachers fan, so I absolutely love it. Well, Courtney, thank you so much for sharing your story. I want to hear a little bit more about what you do. Obviously, don't share stuff that you can't share, but now that you're at Wells Fargo, like what tool do you use the most every day?
Yeah, so I use Tableau and Excel the most every day, and SQL, of course. In our world, we use Teradata, which is just another data management system, and SAS. But we can use ProcSQL, which you can code. And so, yeah, those are the three things. But what I would say is that when you're hired into any role, they don't expect you to know everything, and you have team members who are there that are more equipped than you are and who have better skills than you are, but also you bring great skills to the table. I can't tell you how much my team has said, I can't believe how fast you're like catching on to this stuff or things like that. And I guess it's just because teachers are constantly learning all the time and our capacity is really great. And so as a teacher, I was used to, constantly new things all the time and learning all the time. And so being able to just kind of soak all of that in now it's like drinking from a fire hose. I think if any of you have been following me on LinkedIn, you probably saw my 1 month post. It was like drinking from a fire hose, and it still is every single day. But one thing that I asked some of my coworkers, I was like, "Hey, how long does it take for you to feel like you weren't like a fish out of the water?" And more than one gets there, and they all have been there for 2 or 3 years. The world of data analytics is not going to. There's going to be something new every single day. Data can be messy, and so no matter like what tool you're using, you can always learn something new. And so I'm learning constantly. I'm learning way more stuff about Tableau and about SQL than I ever knew before I got into the job. But that's what I expected to do. I didn't expect to have all of the answers. I knew that I didn't have all the answers going in.
Yeah, and if you remember, this is something I've talked about more recently, but one of my like main theses in my like coaching curriculum of like helping people go from, for instance, teacher to data analyst is you're never going to know it all. Like you'll never know it all. So stop trying. Instead, let's just get you the basics. Like you said, Excel, SQL, Tableau. That's what I teach inside of the boot camp. And then let's figure out a way that you can get paid to learn the rest. Cause
Yeah.
like I did not cover Teradata. I did not cover SAS.
Ah,
We didn't talk about that at all. But now I'm assuming you might not know them perfectly, but you know how to use them a little bit.
yeah.
And you made a salary. They basically paid you to learn those things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's always they offer tons of development courses and stuff for free once you get into most companies offer it. Like my company offers, we have a develop you center where I can go in and I can learn anything about many different tools. And my husband's company has something as well. He just transitioned from teaching as well. And so he's constantly learning and growing, and yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, I love that because you don't have to know it all. So for me, that would be very stress relieving. Like, oh, okay, I don't need to know it all. I just
Yes.
need to
And
know,
yeah.
just
And
learn a few things. That's it.
yeah, yeah, and Google, like, Google. If you don't know something, Google it. It's totally fine. Actually, in my interview, that is what kind of gave me a sigh of relief, is that one of the managers said, "Yeah, if we don't know something, we Google it." And I was like, "Yeah, this is the place for me."
That's awesome. Thank you, Courtney, for sharing your experience. I think that was very useful. And I think our listeners will also think it's very useful. If you're a teacher right now, or if you're whatever profession you are that maybe is not related to, STEM or not related to engineering or not related to computer science or data in any way, just, look at Courtney as an awesome example of going from a quote unquote unrelated role. I agree. I think teachers are data analysts as well, but going from that to where she's at now, where she not only got a data role, but got a senior data role, like a lead role. Like that is amazing. And so thank you so much, Courtney, for coming on the Data Career Podcast and sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, I'm going to have an awesome free masterclass that I know you're going to love. We're going to talk about a lot of things this episode talked about. You can get it absolutely for free at datacareerjumpstart.com/training or using the link in the show notes down below. Hope to see you there.